from age for maturity for a boy.
Yeah.
Is it 15? Someone was saying it's a bit later for Imam Wali.
Yeah. Inshallah, when we do that, we'll probably do that next year. Okay, so Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabul Ijarati. So this is the chapter of leasing and renting. So because this is to do with trade, and I thought might as well just mention that, go through that now. Otherwise, there's Kitabul Hajar and Kitabul Iqrar. These two are not directly linked with trading, and we don't really come across these that much. So this is why I thought we'll do Ijara, renting, and then if we get chance later on, we'll do Hajar, or maybe next year. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ijara, yeah, Ajara yujiru ijaratan, is to do with renting, leasing. So in a normal trade, you have two things that you exchange on both sides. You have two things physically that are exchanged. These are both known as mal. Mubadalatul mali bil mal. Exchange of wealth on both sides. When it comes to ijara, on both sides you don't have mal. On one side you have mal, and on the other side you have usufruct. Usufruct, manfa', benefit. Yeah, so usufruct means benefit. For example, like you hire someone to build an extension in your house. So when you hire them, the action that they're doing is not mal, because technically it doesn't exist. Yeah, so it doesn't really exist. He's going to do the work. A service, yeah. Or for example, like you hire a car for a day. So when you hire the car for the day, you're not hiring the physical car. You're not going to use the physical car. You're going to use that car's services, the usufruct, the benefit that you're going to gain from it. Yeah, so it's consuming the usufruct, the benefit. In Arabic you call this manfa'a. Yeah, so this is what ijara is all about. So you rent a house. If you want to rent a house, you don't buy the house. You're actually like paying for the benefit of being in that house. Whether you use it or not doesn't matter, but you're paying for the benefit of that house. So ijara is the first thing that he's going to start off with, is the definition of ijara. What is the definition of ijara? Ijara is aqdun ala al-manafi' bi'iwadin. Ijara is a transaction upon manafi', usufruct. Manafi' jama of manfa'a. Yeah, usufruct, it means something which is non-tangible that you utilize, benefit. Bi'iwad, bi in exchange for something. Yeah, iwad. So you might give money, you might give gold, silver, you might give anything. Everyone understand that? Everyone understand what ijara is now? Okay. So basically, if you're a boss in a company, you got employees, this is ijara. You have a contract with them, they work for you, you pay them weekly or monthly. You're doing ijara basically. Or you hire someone to do a job for you, it's ijara. Or you go to the barbers to get your haircut. What are you doing? Are you buying anything? His service, yeah, the benefit, usufruct. Or you get a chauffeur to drive you around. Or you go on the bus to pay for something. All this comes under ijara. They don't come under normal transactions. So, what are the conditions for an ijara to be valid? So the conditions are that the two things. Number one, the usufruct has to be known. So for example, like if I'm going to go on a bus and pay for the ride, I need to know from where to where I'm going to go. The driver needs to know as well. Or if I get a guy to work for me, he needs to know what he's going to do, and I need to know what I can utilize him for. Yeah, so it can't be majhul. Like in transactions, we said over there that transactions, when you buy something, you need to know what you're buying. It can't be something which is ambiguous. So here, the same thing applies here. So you want to hire someone to do the gardening. You can't just say, I want to hire you. He needs to know for what? Because you could hire him to do the gardening. You could hire him to fix a roof. You could hire him to drive a car. Maybe he's not good at those things. So it's going to end up in a fight.
So if you went on the bus and only you knew where you're going from to where and the driver didn't, that
Ijara wouldn't be valid.
So both has to know.
Yeah, both has to know. That's why you pay for it. Yeah. وَلَا تَصِحُّ حَتَّى تَكُونَ الْمَنَافِعُ مَعْلُومَةً. Ijara is not valid until the manafi', meaning the usufruct, is known. It has to be known what service you're utilizing. Okay. Number 2, وَالْأُجْرَةُ مَعْلُومَةً. And the ujra, the money that you give, must be known as well. So if you get a taxi, you say to the taxi, right, I need a taxi. The first thing he's going to ask you, where do you want to go? This is the manafi'. He needs to know how much you're going to utilize the taxi. So you say, I want to go to Manchester. He goes, okay, Manchester, and he says £100 to go to Manchester. So now you have to pay, you have to mention the amount you're going to give him. I'm going to give you £100 to go to Manchester. If you said to him, okay, take me to Manchester, and you didn't mention a price, what's going to happen? Most likely end up in a fight. Yeah, because you might think to yourself, I'm going to pay him 100, and he might be thinking 150. And it causes an argument. So, وَالْأُجْرَةُ مَعْلُومَةً. Or you hire someone in your company to work for you. And you say to him, I want you to work from 9 to 5, yeah, for 6 months for me. And you haven't told him how much he's going to earn. That's going to cause a fight. So he has to know. So these two things are the conditions. Okay, next. What can you give in ijara? Does it have to be currency? So if you've got a guy working for you, or if you get a taxi, or if you hire, a sports hall to play, sports in badminton, for example, what are you going to give them? Can you give them like money? Can you give them, an object like a chair? Can you give them something else? So the rule is this: anything that is valid to give in a normal transaction. So anything that you can exchange in a normal transaction, you're allowed to give in ijara. So for example, like currency, or for example, like gold, silver, or foodstuffs, right? All these things you can give. What can't you give? Alcohol. Yes, because you can't give alcohol in a normal transaction. You can't give in ijara. Pork. You can't give in a normal transaction, so you can't give in ijara. Yeah, something that doesn't exist. You can't give in a normal transaction, so you can't give in. Yeah, the bird flying in the sky. Yeah, because remember we said you're unable to hand it over. Receipt is not possible. So the same thing over there we mentioned that you can hand over, right? You can hand over here. وَمَا جَازَ أَن يَكُونَ ثَمَنًا فِي الْبَيْءِ. And anything that is permissible to be counted as a thaman, a price in a transaction. Jaza is permissible, and yakuna ujratan, that this is considered to be a fee, payment, fil ijarati, in leasing. So everyone understand that? Yeah. So a lot of the things that we do today, it comes under leasing, but you don't realize it. A lot of the things that we have, you might not even realize, but you pay for a lot of services which come under leasing. Even in companies, for example, sometimes a company, you might go to your bank, or you might go somewhere and you might pay them a little fee, and that little fee is for the ijara, using their services, phone rental, line rental, or even other things as well. Yeah, so this is the concept of usufruct. Now, obviously, this concept of usufruct itself, is this mal or not? Yeah, is it mal? So for example, like if you get someone to build you an extension in the back of your garden, you provided all the material. All they have to do is just do the labor, that's it. Or you got your car, you took it to a mechanic, you bought the parts. All you need him to do is fit those parts in. Is his action mal or not? So the Hanafis say no, it's not mal. It's not counted as mal. Because mal has to be something which is tangible. Yeah, something that can be demarcated. And according to the Shafi'is, however, they say that usufruct can be considered to be mal. Yeah. So because of this difference, there's obviously going to be consequences to this. So just bear that in mind, just keep that in mind.
So the Shafis are saying the person, so the mechanic is mal, or his service is mal.
Service is mal. Yeah. His service is mal. Okay, next. Now, next question is, things like a house, you want to rent a house, and you want to rent the house for 6 months. So you tell the guy, here's the contract, I want to sign the contract, I want to rent it off you for 6 months. He goes, fine. Okay. So this is a way of defining the time period that you want to do the ijara for. So how long do you want to do the leasing for? And you write down in the box, 6 months. Yeah. This is known as, the muddatun ma'luma. But for different things, it's going to be different. So he says, وَالْمَنَافِئُ تَارَةً تَصِيرُ مَعْلُومَةً بِالْمُدَّةِ. Sometimes the manafi, because remember manafi is non-tangible, isn't it? You can't smell it, you can't see, you can't touch it. So it's like non-existent. Technically, ijara shouldn't be allowed in fiqh, in Islam. Why? Because you're paying for something that doesn't exist. If you go to the barbers and you say, okay, cut my hair, you're paying for something that doesn't exist. And we said before that when you buy something, it has to exist for you to be able to buy it. The Prophet ﷺ, he forbade buying something which doesn't exist, because this is ambiguity, and ambiguity will lead to arguments. Yeah, if you say to someone, like some people, they won't have anything with them, but they'll sell you it and then they'll buy it and then they'll give you it. Right? Now, if you do that and the person can't provide that thing, it's going to cause an argument. So technically ijara shouldn't be allowed, but this has been exempted. Yeah, this rule has been exempted because the Prophet ﷺ himself permitted ijara. Yeah, so because he permitted it, it's like it's broken that rule now. So this is an exemption to the rule. Just like we said about salam, if you remember. Salam should not be allowed because you're paying for something that doesn't exist. It's still got to grow on the trees or whatever. So, but this is the same as well. So this is why the manafi is something which is non-tangible. So it becomes ma'loom through different ways. Bil muddati. Yeah, sometimes it becomes ma'loom, known via the mudda. What's the mudda? Time period. So if I say to you, okay, I want to rent this house from you for 6 months. Okay, 6 months. كاستئجار الدور للسكنة. Like renting homes, a home, للسكنة, for living in, or والأرض أرضين, or land, للزراعة, for growing things. So some people will have a project, businessmen. Their project is they want to grow a certain type of crop, but they don't have the land. The land belongs to the farmers. So what they'll do is they'll go to the farmer, they'll say to the farmer, here, I want to rent your land for 2 years, 2-year period, and I'll give you this much money for it. Right? So because he's mentioned the period, then he can rent the land. فَيَصِحُ الْعَقْدُ عَلَى مُدَّةٍ مَعْلُومَةٍ أَيَّ مُدَّةٍ كَانَتْ. So based on this, in this scenario, whether you rent a house or whether you rent land, you can rent this so long as the mudda ma'luma, so long as the period is known. It doesn't matter how long the period is for. You can rent something for, nowadays you can rent things for minutes. For a few minutes you rent something. Yeah. For a few hours, for a few days, for years people rent things, and this is a very, very, very common thing now. So a lot of these shops that open up businesses, they don't buy machinery anymore. Because if they buy the machinery becomes obsolete, and then no one wants to buy it off them. So it's pointless buying a machine that costs hundreds of thousands of pounds, and then all of a sudden having no one to buy it off you, unless you want to sell it to a third world country for a very reduced price. So what they do nowadays is they lease things out. Yeah, so they will get in touch with the manufacturers. The manufacturers say, okay, you can rent it out from us for this period of time, and you use it, and then you give it back to us. That's it. And they dispose of it, whatever they want to do with it. Same with big offices that want to buy loads of computers. Instead of buying lots of computers, because the computers are going to become obsolete in 5 years' time, then what are they going to do with them? So they'll just rent the computers off them, and they'll just have someone that always repairs them. People do this at home with appliances as well, and cars. Now people are doing the cars as well. So they have these kind of finance leasing. So they lease the car for 2 years, 3 years. Then when the lease finishes, they'll start a new one with another car. And this way, it saves them all the hassle of buying and selling cars. Yeah, so this is something that people do. So as long as you specify the mudda, the time period for anything, is fine. Okay, that's one way the manafi becomes ma'loom, through time period. Number two, the second way it becomes ma'loom is with a particular type of action. Yeah, it's defined by the action. So for example, like you say to someone, you go to the barbers and you say, cut my hair. Yeah, you say to him, okay, I want short back and sides. Or yeah, I want trim. Or you want to dye my hair. Or I want you to do this to my hair. Or whatever. So whatever you tell him to do, he can take as long as it takes him. So there's no time period. You haven't specified time period. You specified the action, the service. Likewise, you might hire someone and you might say to them, okay, I need you to dig up all this land. And he goes, fine. So you pay him, and whatever time it takes him, he does it. Or for example, like, let's say you hired someone, you got some electric problems in your house. You hired someone to fix electricity in your house. So you didn't do it by time period, you did it by action. Now you can obviously utilize someone's services by time as well, like an employee. So you have an employee and you say to him, you're going to work for me by the hour. Yeah, so every hour I'm going to give you this much. That would be the first time, bil mudda. Otherwise you can do amal as well. Everyone understand the two?
Can you do both?
I mean, how are you going to combine both in one contract?
So, like for example, in engineering we have to deliver a certain project by a certain deadline. So it's the action is design a road, and it needs to be completed by 2020, maybe December 2020. So, is there anything wrong with that?
I mean, I'm not sure, Yeah, I know what you're saying. I don't know. I'll have to check that one up.
So if there's a tangible item, like we're saying a car, machinery, do you have to specify a time?
If it's a tangible item.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know.
You can't really, for a tangible item, you can't really, it's not really a service, is it?
Yeah, but the service is you're using it.
Okay.
So for example, sometimes they might say to you, okay, like public transport, that's a certain distance. Yeah, a certain distance. They use that as the manafi. So once you've reached that particular distance, then you kind of used it. And sometimes you might rent something for a certain period of time. So you hire a car and they say you got 6 hours with the car. So that's to do with that. But what Ariba is saying about the the main thing is you want to get the manafi ma'loom. That's what you want to do. So as long as, I would say as long as according to the convention, it's something which is the way to, identify the manafi, demarcate it, that's fine then. It would be allowed. But I haven't really looked that one up, so I can't really tell you.
Wouldn't that normal employment be fall under that as well, what Arif said?
What?
Because you're specified to do a certain type of job for a certain amount of time every day.
Not necessarily. See, it's not completion of a job, is it? Okay. You're just working for someone. Yeah, so completion of a job is obviously something else. Okay, so that's the second one. So taratan tasiru ma'lumatan, and sometimes it becomes known bil amal wa tasmiyah, by action and by naming it. So you say, I want this done, I want that done. Kaman istajara rajulan, just like a person who hires a man, ala sibghi thawbin, to dye cloth. So in the olden days they'd give cloth to get that cloth dyed. So this obviously doesn't have a time period attached to it, it's just completion of the action. Or khiyatati thawbin, or sewing the clothes, like you give cloth to a tailor, right? Or to someone who does a particular certain job, and you give him the cloth and you say, I want this suit made for me. So it's not about the time period, it's about the action. Or number three, this is, not number three, this is continuing. Or istajara dabbatan, or a person hires an animal. In the olden days, they weren't cars, so they used to ride animals. So he hires an animal, لِيَحْمِلْ عَلَيْهِ مِقْدَارًا مَعْلُومًا إِلَى مَوْضِعٍ مَعْلُومٍ, so that the animal can carry upon it a certain item to a certain distance. Yeah, so for example, like nowadays, let's say there's a company and they hire a car, courier service, and they want goods transferred from one part to another. Yeah, just like your postal service. So this is also in this concept as well, because that's completion of the action. Completion of the action is to get the goods all the way to this destination. Once it reaches the desired destination, then he's done his job. And if he doesn't reach that destination, he hasn't done his job, so he doesn't deserve the fee. So معلوما إلى موضع معلوم أو يركبها مسافة معلومة. Or another example is a person, he hires an animal to take him to a certain distance. In today's times, it'd be a car. Yeah, so a person, for example, like nowadays, coach service or train station or buses or taxi will all come under this. So you pay them, and then their job, they deserve the payment once they get to your destination. If they don't get to your destination, they don't deserve the payment, because that was the agreement between you and them. So you got on the train and it stopped halfway and told everyone to get off. They don't deserve that payment. You technically deserve a refund. Yeah. So this is these all of these things come under amal. Yeah, amal and tasmiyah. Oh, finally, yarkabaha and then thirdly, so number one was manafi becomes ma'loom via mudda. Number two, manafi becomes ma'loom via completing the action. And number three, wataratan tasiru ma'loomatan bit-ta'yin wal-ishara. Yeah, and sometimes it becomes specified by a person, or becomes known by a person specifying or indicating towards it. How is this? So for example, let's say there's a man, استأجر رجلا, who hires another person, لينقل هذا الطعام إلى موضع معلوم. So he just says this. He goes, I want this over there. Yeah, so he doesn't even say anything. He just says, I want this over there. Have you got that? So whatever way he gets that food over there, in whatever form he uses. So the previous one was that he hires an animal. Like he hires a car and he puts the stuff in there to get it to a destination. This is not that. This is where he tells a specific person that he wants all this stuff taken over there. So, like we said, the whole point of all this is we want to know exactly what the service you're utilizing is. Yeah, what the user fruct is. Everyone got that? Alright, next. Now, let's say a person wants to rent a house. What are the problems with renting houses? What are the problems with tenants? Okay, they don't pay. Okay, so let's say, for example, we can get them to pay. Okay, if they don't pay, we can take them to court, and the courts will force them to pay. Damage the property, yeah? So obviously damage the property is a big thing, and this was a common thing that could happen. And that would all be due to a person, how he utilizes the property. Yeah, so how he lives in the property, what kind of work he does in there. So, يجوز استئجار الدور, it is permissible to hire or rent dur, homes, hawanit, and hawanit is a jam of hanut. Yeah, and it usually is used for like taverns or shops. Lissukna, to live in them. So anyone who has any sort of a building, you can hire it out. Yeah, so hiring out is like, as long as you got a plot of land, you can hire that out. Even if in the contract, so for example, let's say this is the room we're going to rent out now. So let's say a Sufa wants to rent out the classrooms, and they say to people, right, we're renting out these classrooms, so you have to draw up a contract. What details are you going to put in the contract? So you need to put the details of the room. They need to know the dimensions of the room, right? And then you need to mention how much the rent is. So you say hourly rent. If you want to rent one of these rooms, hourly rent is, let's say, £15 an hour to rent one of these rooms. Yeah? And you don't have to mention in that contract what they are allowed and what they're not allowed to do. Yeah, as long as you mention that. وَإِن لَمْ يُبَيِّن مَا يُعْمَلُ فِيهِ. Even if he doesn't mention what he's allowed to do and not allowed to do, the contract still goes through. Does that make sense? So it's not a condition that you have to state in the contract what is allowed and what is not allowed. Yes, if you do state it in the contract, then he has to abide by that. Remember that? So walahu, so for the tenant, lahu goes back to the tenant. The tenant has the right an ya'mala kulla shay'in, he can do everything in there. Now you see, when we say he can do everything in there, obviously it's all to do with the convention. In society, what do people normally do in these kind of places? Yeah, so let's say a person wants to hire a room just to have a little rest for an hour or two. Someone wants to hire a room because they want people to have a meeting there. Someone wants to hire a room because they want to have a class teach there. Someone wants to hire a room because they want to have a party there. Yeah, so all these things are not really going to damage the building. They're not going to do too much damage. So any sort of an action, when it says he has the right to do any action there, it means any action which is not going to cause damage to the property. That's why he says illa, except for al-haddada wal-qasara wal-tahan. Apart from three things. What are the three things? So the three things, number one is a blacksmith. Why can't he do blacksmith? Huh?
Smoke.
Yeah, because there's going to be fire there. There's going to be smoke there. There's going to be lots of loud noise there. Hammering. Yeah, and it's going to weaken the building as well, foundations, if you keep on hammering. Yeah, I mean, in them days, obviously the buildings are quite weak. Nowadays, they're stronger. So we have to understand it in their days. What kind of things would cause damage to buildings in their days? Nowadays, it might not even be a problem. Number two is qasara. So qasara refers to clothes washing. Dobi, that we call it dobi in Urdu. So a person, a dry cleaner, in the olden days, even nowadays in like third world countries, when they wash clothes, they use water, lots of water, and they're hitting the clothes against the walls, and it damages. The water can get cause a lot of damp in the structure. So there will be lots of problems caused by this. And number three, tahan, is a mill. Yeah, so they can't use it as a mill. They can't use it for grinding seeds, because same thing again. For grinding seeds in them days, you would need two big pieces of rock that you place on top of one another, and then that would obviously cause vibrations in the building, which could weaken the structure.
So these three, does that come from the hadith, or is that just like from practices?
No, this is all to do with just logical reasoning.
Okay.
So that's why I said you need to understand in their days. So therefore, it wouldn't just be those three things. There'd be other things as well. So nowadays, what kind of things wouldn't be allowed in a building without explicit permission?
So if it's a house, like you couldn't do like car repairs probably.
Yeah. Nowadays, like car repairs. Yeah. What else? You probably couldn't use it as like a club. Yeah. Because there'd be lots of music there. There'd be lots of shouting and screaming and fights. And if it's in a built-up neighborhood, then obviously that's got to be taken into consideration. What else? Like nowadays, you have issues where, public congregations. So some people, they convert their houses into mosques. That wouldn't be allowed, because then obviously that would create problems for the residents. If there's lots of cars always parking up.
I guess it's anything that requires a different planning permission, change of use.
Planning permission as well nowadays, you'd have that issue as well. Nowadays in like rented houses, they'll tell you can't hammer nails into the walls. Yeah, you can't, use certain type of machinery in the building as well. So nowadays, there's lots of small print when you do any contract. But this was in the olden days, this is how it was. Everyone got that? Okay, and this is why, like I said before, this is why you need to understand how fiqh was applied in the olden days, so you can take the lessons from that and you can apply it in today's days. Because like the question you asked, is it only these three things? Where did they come from? So it's not just these three things. These are like the three examples which are based upon a certain principle. So once you grasp that principle and you can apply it in today's times, it makes sense then. Yeah, so like I said, in today's times, there are lots of other factors to be taken into consideration. Yeah, noise and planning permission, and is it going to affect the local community, parking, and also like certain now flammable things as well now, chemicals. So it's people that grow cannabis. Like if you rent, for example, if you rented your property to someone who grew cannabis, would that be allowed or not? No, it'd be allowed. It's allowed. Because remember, whatever they do whatever they do inside that building is not necessarily a problem, unless it's explicitly wrong.
We've seen properties that have been used for that purpose.
But like you said, but the problem is that if they are going to damage the building, so some of them, what they do is they like tear out the electricity, and they'll get their own kind of sort of dodgy wiring done, from the main street cables, and they'll like make the house extremely prone to explosions and fire, and put the neighbors at risk as well. So because of all that, then it wouldn't be allowed. But just renting your house out to someone and you know that they're growing cannabis in there, it wouldn't be a problem itself. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So these three things and similar things like this, if you don't specify when you do ijara of the house, you don't specify these things, you just can't do.
Yeah, you can take them to court basically. So if they did do any of these things, you take them to court and the courts would say, these are things that are not accepted in our convention. Conventions are not accepted in our society, and so you'd be liable to that. And
so in order to do rent for one of these, then you have to specify.
Get explicit permission from the person. Okay, next. Everyone got that? Next, now land now. What are the problems with renting land out?
So just going back on the house one, wouldn't mudda be a problem? You specify that I'm going to live in your house for 6 months, and they want to live longer.
That's fine.
Wouldn't that be a problem? Because you've gone against the...
Yeah, that's fine. So the rule is that if a person does live longer, then obviously they're liable for...
You could just throw them out, even though it's not...
Yeah, that's it. Remember, you always have to remember you can bring the authorities as well. So you can bring the authorities into the, into the case, and they can deal with it as well. Okay, what kind of problems can you have in land? So obviously in land there can be lots of things, issues. For example, like the land, it can get damaged. Yeah, some types of land obviously don't have access to water. Some types of land, if you grow certain crops in there, it takes out all the nutrients. Yeah, and this is why they used to have rotational agriculture in the past. So they would grow, in England, they would grow certain seasons, certain crops, and the next season they'll grow a crop that doesn't take too much nutrients out, actually puts nutrients back into the land. And then they'll grow a crop. So you can't just grow anything in your land, because you might be damaging the land for 2 years. If you just grow, let's say, purely rice, just rice on that land, after the 2 years and you go, the owner of the land might not be able to do anything with it. So he says, وَيَجُوزُ إِسْتِئْجَارُ الْأَرَاضِي لِلزِّرَاعَةِ. It's permissible to hire land for growing stuff on there. Yeah, so for growing crops, growing stuff is permissible. Yeah, in other words, this still comes under usufruct manafi', because you're going to be growing all of that. So in other words, this is fine. Now, the guy who rents the land off you, the tenant on the land, what rights does he have? So like I said to you, imagine you want to rent land, and you're on that land, you want to grow, let's say, rice, yeah, or you want to grow wheat or something like that. What happens? What does that tenant need? Remember we said when a person buys a house, what does the customer expect when he's buying the house that he's going to get? So he needs the basic utilities. Yeah, he needs access to water, access to the building. He needs these basic fundamental things that any person needs to be able to utilize the house. So therefore, this mustajir, the tenant, he has the right to shirb. Shirb means access to water. Yeah, shurb is to drink, and shirb is the access to water. So therefore, let's say for example, this is in the middle here, right, in the middle of you guys. Let's say this is the land I'm renting out, and Imtiaz wants to rent this from me. So now I've got other land over there and there's water over there. So the only way for him to benefit from this land is to get access to that water. So therefore legally he should be able to get a channel that goes from that water to his land. Otherwise he can't utilize the land. Does that make sense? This is known as shirb. This is known as shirb. This is. So lil mustajir, and the mustajir, the tenant, has the right to to shirb, what tariq, and access. Tariq means road. So he needs to have access to land. So let's say, for example, I'm renting out this land, right? And I own all the land around this land. So this is like, a landlocked piece of land. He needs to be able to get access to come from his home into this land. So he has to be able to, he can't be trespassing. So how is he going to get land where he can't get through without trespassing? Doesn't make sense. So therefore you have to give him access to it. It has to be access, some access point. So therefore this is like the rights of the tenant. So lil mustajir, the tenant has the right to shirb, water access, and transport access. وَإِن لَمْ يَشْتَرِطْ وَإِن لَمْ, even if it's not يَشْتَرِطْ, conditioned. Even if it's not in the contract. So the contract didn't say anything about I want water as well, access, and I want a road that gets me to there. Didn't mention it. But legally, the convention is in the society that he needs to have the access. Now in today's times, what would he need?
Key for that.
Maybe electricity, yeah, if there's like some sort of a water system there that relies on electricity. Yeah, key, maybe there's gates, fences. So he needs a key to get in. Yeah, and any other things that you can think of. So all those things would be necessary, would be essential for him to be able to benefit from the land. Now,
if the property doesn't have, for example, water access and it's stipulated that we will be providing, is that okay? And the tenant has to sort it out, so then it's okay.
Yeah, if he says, look, I don't have any water, like he's in a desert, then obviously that's not his problem. Okay, next. Remember we said what things can be grown on the land. So, because this is a really big problem, this is, like some people would want to really, just grow something on the land, benefit themselves, yeah, and even if it harms other person's land, like people do nowadays, they'll go to third world countries, big multinational companies, they'll grow things like palm oil, yeah, palm tree oil, and they'll grow lots of that over there, and then they'll, destroy so much land over there because of growing all of these things, because they got machinery that goes over the land. And so then what happens is that after that no one can benefit from the land. The land becomes like a desert, and when the top soil, the nutritious soil, when that becomes useless and wasted, then the owner cannot benefit from the land himself, nor can he rent it out to anyone. No one's going to want to rent it. So this is why it's necessary that in the contract you have to mention what you're going to grow. Yeah, so you got to mention in there. So it's got to be mentioned in there. Okay, I'm going to grow, let's say tomatoes, or I'm going to grow rice, or I'm going to be growing apples, or I'm going to be growing whatever, cannabis. I'm going to be growing cannabis. You got to mention what you're going to be growing, and if the guy looks at it and says, you know what, you can't grow these things because, these are going to harm my land. Sorry, can't do it. Then you can't. Then the contract obviously doesn't go through. The other way around this is in the contract, if he makes it open, if he says in the contract that you can grow anything, that I, so and so, I'm renting this land on the condition I can grow anything I want. Yeah, that's fine. Signs you off. Yeah, is that allowed?
Yeah.
It's allowed. Yeah. So this is why, in fiqh you don't just look at like the do's and the don'ts. You have to also look at the deeper problems in society as well. So many of you might not have been aware of the problems growing crops can have on land. And I mean, there must be so many other things as well now, like for example, pesticides. Yeah, so for example, people might grow something, they use pesticides, and by the time they've harvested all their crops and finished the contract, there's so much pesticide in that land now that it's going to contaminate the water supply, and everyone else's things that are growing in nearby land is going to become affected as well. And it might even introduce like some sort of insects into that land which cause harm. Yeah, so you got to think about all these things as well. Yeah. Right, so he says وَلَا يَصِحُّ الْعَقْدُ حَتَّى يُسَمِّيَ مَا يَزْرَعُ فِيهَا. is not permissible. The contract is not permissible until he specifies what he's going to grow in it. أو يقول, or he says, على, on the condition أن يزرع فيها ما شاء. He's going to grow in there whatever he wants. So there are two ways you can say this. Everyone got that? Next. Let's say, for example, someone wants to rent a land. Like some people do this for weddings, right? They might go outside somewhere in the countryside. They got really cheap land that's on rent. Like, you know, people rent for car boot sales, right, and other fairs, circuses. So they'll rent a land, and then what they do is they build a temporary structure. Yeah. So just like, you know, they might have a marquee up, or they might build some temporary sort of toilets or some buildings. Is that allowed? Can you rent a land and then build things on there as well? Yes or no?
Specify that's problem.
Yeah, if obviously something that's not going to harm the land, it's known. So therefore it's something which is allowed. So يجوز أن يستأجر, it's permissible for a person to hire a saha. Saha means an open area. ليبني فيها, in order to build on it. Okay, everyone got that? Number one. Number two, أو يغرس فيها نخلا أو شجرا, or he grows, so he's rented out a plot of land and he wants to grow trees on there. So some people have like these nurseries. So there's certain parts of the world where certain things will grow and they won't grow in other parts of the world. So what some people do is they'll rent out a specific area of land and they grow certain trees there. And when those trees grow, they'll pull them from the ground and then they'll sell the tree somewhere. People make a lot of money from that. Yeah. So is this allowed? Yes, it's allowed. Again, as long as it's stated in the contract and the guy's okay with it. Right. The problem now is, what if the contract matures? The contract comes to an end. Once the contract comes to an end, what's going to happen to the building? It doesn't belong to the guy who owns the land. So legally, Islamically, if any wealth does not belong to you, then obviously it's not yours, even if it's stuck in your land. So the trees as well, they belong to the tenant, they don't belong to you. So therefore, what's going to happen here? So if you think about it logically, you know, the guy has to give the land back as he took it. Yeah, just as he took it, he needs to, you know, give it back. But what's going to happen to the building? So the building, he's got a choice. Either number one, he can say to the guy, look, can you get rid of everything? I want the land back. That's his right, that is. Legally, he can do that. Yeah, so let's say Imtiaz rents the land off me and he's built this temporary structure there for, let's say, an event that he had. In like the Olympics maybe. They had the Olympics somewhere, they hired some land out. And now he goes, oh, I don't want this building. I want my land back. So Imtiaz would have to pay, obviously, from his own pocket to get this whole place dismantled and give the land back. That's number one. Number two, or I can say to him, look, you know what? I'll buy this stuff off you. This big structure that you made is quite nice. I'll buy it off you. So give my land back and I'll buy this off you. But what price am I going to get it for? Am I going to get it for the price it is at the moment in the ground? Or am I going to get it for the price of the structure itself detached from the ground? How much would it cost if it was not attached to any ground? Does that make sense? So maybe attached to the ground, it costs £10,000, but detached, just the materials itself, it costs £5,000. So out of those two, which one would I have to pay for? Detached. Yeah. So it's detached because the land is mine anyway. Yes, that's nothing to do with it. Yeah, so it's detached. So likewise, a building as well. If there's a building made of bricks, so you work out what the value of all the bricks are and everything put together, and I just have to give that. Or if there's any other sort of a structure, trees there as well, what the values of, you know, pulled out trees would be.
So do you have to pay Imtiaz for the stuff he's put on?
If he wants to give it for free to me, it's fine.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But if he's paid for those things, so legally, Islamically, he is the owner of those items.
Yeah, no, I was just more thinking if he's built something, he's just gonna see for him to dispose it, it's gonna cost him. So he says, "I'll leave."
Yeah, that's fine. Then he's gifted it to me.
Yeah.
Then it comes under the rulings of gifting. So the chapter of gifting would apply to it. Okay, number 3, the third option is this, is that he can give me this, he can give me back the land, but the property is his, if we come to a mutual agreement. So maybe I know Imtiaz, so you know Imtiaz, okay, that place is yours. Next year you might need it again. You might want to hold another event. You can keep it on this, okay. So therefore the land is mine, but the structure is his. So we've come to like some sort of a mutual partnership. Everyone got that? Yeah. And I mean some people do this as well. Like for example, maybe Imtiaz, he's built this structure now. Maybe he's built a football stadium on my land. So he's paying me rent for the football stadium, and then he's renting this football stadium out to someone else. So as long as I'm okay with it, for him, the tenant, leasing out to someone else, that's okay. Everyone got that?
What if he leaves it there for a year, and during that time, you as a landlord, can you lease it, make use of it if you...
No, I wouldn't be able to. Because the land I can lease, but the property itself doesn't belong to me. That would be his. Okay, so فَإِذَا انْقَضَتْ مُدَّةُ الْإِجَارَةِ when the mudda of ijara expires, لَزِمَهُ, it's necessary upon the tenant Imtiaz أن يقلع البناء, to detach the building, والغرس, and the crops or the plants, trees. وَيُسَلِّمَهَا فَارِغَةً, and he must hand it over, meaning hand the land over, فَارِغَةً, empty, as it was. إِلَّا أَنْ يَخْتَارَ, unless the صاحب الأرض, me, the landlord, chooses أن يغرم له, to compensate him, compensate Imtiaz, قيمة ذلك مقلوءا, the value of that structure detached from the ground. So everyone understand why it's detached from the ground? Because obviously the value is going to be less. ويتملكها, meaning that he becomes the owner of it. So now that property is going to become mine now. So I don't have to detach it, but I give the value of it detached. Or option number 3, أو يرضى بتركه على حاله, or I am happy to leave the structure as it is in its condition. فيكون البناء لهذا, so the building will be for this guy, meaning the tenant. والأرض لهذا, and the land will be for this guy, meaning the landlord. We'll stop there. Everyone understand that?
When Imtiaz gives the building, the land back, and he says, I'll give you the building that's on it,
Yeah.
but just as it's detached price,
Yeah.
wouldn't he lose that money for building it? Would that be
That's up to him, and that's up to him.
Oh, that's up to him.
Yeah, it's up to
He
him.
can't claim that back.
So obviously, Imtiaz would have thought about this beforehand, what's going to happen. I'm going to be spending so much money, but some people do this kind because they make the money. Yeah.
You incorporate the cost of it.
Yeah. He could have made all the money on his event. Yeah, and that structure cost him nothing. And he just left it as it was. Yeah. Some people, like for example, they have stock that comes in from abroad, lots and lots and lots of merchandise, and they have nowhere to put it, so they just temporarily build themselves a warehouse. Have you seen these big ones that are on the side of the roads, industrial areas? Yeah, they just like put this big structure up and they just put these big cladding on it. Yeah, and they just use it as storage for something. And it's very, very cheap, extremely cheap, rather than storing it in a normal storage facility. So they make all their money that way. Ji, any other question? No.
You know this issue about landlocked land that you described out. Is it the person, the owner, to provide the access and the water? Because sometimes he hasn't got that facility, or has that person got the right to ask who's able land able to be passing to get the access?
Yeah, I mean, how is he going to benefit from the land?
No, but there is places where you see they're selling a piece of land. This guy owns this, but you have to get access of somebody else, a third party to access it.
Yeah, so if that's the case, all that would have to be mentioned in the contract. All that has to be mentioned, because the guy who's leasing the land, like the tenant could take him to court and say, look, he leased the land to me and I can't get no access to water or anything.
But the other guy is the third party doesn't have to give access if they don't.
Yeah, that's something else. That's a separate, totally separate issue. Generally, when there's land, what the government will do will actually get the person who's got water. If he's got like a natural source of water, he'll force him to give access to everyone water, if it's not going to harm him. And it happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, where there was two Sahaba, Zubair ibn Awam and Muhammad al-Maslama. And the Prophet Muhammad al-Maslama asked Zubair ibn Awam, he said, look, can you, Muhammad, he needs access to your water. He goes, I don't want to give it, it's my water. The Prophet said, look, he's just asking. He goes, no, I don't want to give it. So then he goes to him that, look, he goes, I'm going to force you to give him the water. Even if it has to go over your body, I'm going to force him. Yeah. He goes, you use whatever water you have to, and once you've used yours, the rest of it, why are you being so greedy for? Pass it over to your neighbor. So that's like a different issue there is. So the tenant can go to court and start a court case to get access to water. So they'll provide access to water. So this is why having a government who is, who facilitates for the businessman in the society is very important. If you have a government that cons you, that robs you, cheats, and can manipulate it easily, it's very difficult for businesses to run. A lot of businesses will leave the country. So this is why if you have a strong government who's upright and upholds the law, that's very beneficial for the businessman. Yeah, they don't get cheated as easily.